Hello, welcome to day 6. This is part 2 of the video from before that said day 5 and 6. This is day 6, the second part. Today's topic is the Congo Free State. Before we get started, let's do a little brief review, orient ourselves in space and time. The Congo Free State was neither free nor was it one state. It was held as King Leopold's personal property. It was made up of hundreds of smaller polities, smaller states, smaller countries, kingdoms, etc. And it was not free to be part of this larger state. The people were held as effectively prisoners, hostages, or slave in everything but name. The question you have to ask is, why do we think Leopold named it this? And I think that the historical record is clear. He named it this to fool other people. He was pretty clear about what he was doing. The people on the ground were pretty clear about what they were doing. But it was a way to prop up his reputation to other people. What do we know about the Congo Free State already? We know some things from the previous set of slides. We know that King Leopold kicked off the scramble for Africa. We know that he made a lot of money off of the Congo's resources, things like ivory. We know that he used the excuse of ending the slave trade to come and control and militarily crack down on freedom in this region. And the scramble for Africa, the scramble for European ownership of African people and places and property and resources, was started by Leopold's example. And the Berlin Conference started the carving up and dividing up of African lands and peoples for European ownership. In some classes, we skip this slide, but I'll go over it briefly for those of you that do need to hear it. Leopold wanted access to the resources of the Congo Free State. So the question is, what were the costs and benefits of building industrial transportation technology in the Congo Free State? The problem with the Congo Free State is that it is mostly made up of areas contiguous with the Congo River. The Congo River is navigable. You can put boats on it, but there are segments that are full of rapids and waterfalls. Those segments are not navigable with boats, and so there needs to be a way to get around them. At first, Leopold and his men used porters, people carrying goods on their shoulders, on their backs, carrying pieces of steamboats up to the wider parts of the river was a big job for porters. It was incredibly difficult, laborious, and hundreds of porters died in the process. Then, in order to prevent the loss of porters through working to death, Leopold had the railroads built. The railroads were built straight through the jungle, and the process of building the railroads was nearly as deadly as the porter job had been before. It's said that for every railroad tie, one of these pieces of wood going across this way, each one of those was paid for with the life of one African worker. The railroads being built, though, resources were easy to get in and out of the Congo. The railroads connected up areas of the river that were navigable by ship. Steamships were put in place to transport goods up and down the river, and between the steamships and the railroads, the resources of the Congo were free for the taking. The benefit of all of this is that the Europeans were able to get the resources of the Congo basin much quicker, more efficiently, and with fewer deaths after the thing had been built. However, the cost was, in the building process, hundreds and thousands of deaths of the workers themselves. And in the lead up to the building process, the transportation provided by porters like these was incredibly deadly. In effect, the costs were paid by Black Africans, the benefits were accrued by white Belgians. This leads us to the thing that changed the value of the Congo forever. How did the invention of the pneumatic, air-filled rubber tire change the value of the resources of the Congo Free State? So King Leopold was spending a lot of money on transportations, trains, steamboats, etc., in the Congo, getting some of his money back through the ivory trade, but he was starting to run out of funding. And then the pneumatic tire was invented, and it changed the value of his resources. Pneumatic tire, first of all, is an air filled rubber tire. So for generations, people used wheels like this. Then in the 18th century, they developed wheels like this with a metal rim around them. And then in the late 1800s, 1880s, 1890s, air filled rubber tires were put around the outside edge of this to make for a way more comfortable ride, way less friction on the ground, and it made possible things like bicycles and automobiles, both of which were immediately popular in Europe, America, etc. And it created a huge demand for rubber, the substance that is used to make tires. Um, so Leopold, luckily for him, already owned the area here in Congo, which is perfect for rubber trees. These black colored in areas are the areas of the globe where the rubber tree grows naturally. And it grows like this. Here's a rubber tree. The way that it's harvested is to slash a piece of the bark off of the tree and let the sap drip down into a pot of some kind. This is a photo from the 1880s, and this is a guy cutting with a knife, and there's the pot to catch the rubber. This is a vine from a rubber tree here behind him. Natural rubber was captured in sort of a liquidy sap form, and then it could be dried and sort of coagulated on the um, and then collected into solid chunks. The really unfortunate thing is that the main way to coagulate the rubber in places like the Congo was to smear it on human skin and then peel it off. Um, this, of course, took some of the hair off of the human's body. In the process, it was incredibly painful, especially it was when it was smeared on people's chests and thighs and pulled off for the first couple of times. Rubber made the Congo 96 times more valuable than it had been before. It was now a very important place in the world, and Leopold was about to become super wealthy. Excuse me. This brings us to the rubber tax. How are you going to get the rubber out of the forest and into the boats? Leopold hired agents, Belgian men, to go around and enforce a rubber tax on villages throughout the Congo. The idea was to tax each village with an agent like this guy here, and he would hire a group of men like these here to be the force publique, to go around and force each village to pay a certain amount of rubber in tax each month or each 2 weeks or each period of time. We can read here from an account written by a Presbyterian missionary interviewing some of the people who paid this rubber tax. The people said, "From our country, each village had to take 20 loads of rubber. We had to take these loads in 4 times a month. We get no pay. We get nothing. Our village got cloth and a little salt, but not the people who did the work. It used to take 10 days to get the 20 baskets of rubber. We were always in the forest to find the rubber vines, to go without food, and our women had to give up cultivating the fields and gardens. Then we starved. Wild beasts, the leopards, killed some of us while we were working away, and others got lost, or died from exposure or starvation, as we begged the white men to leave us alone, saying we could get no more rubber. But the white men and their soldiers say, 'Go. You are only beasts yourselves. You are only nyama, meat.' We tried, always going further into the forest, and when we failed and our rubber was short, the soldiers came to our towns and killed us. Many were shot, some had their ears cut off, others were tied up with ropes around their necks, and bodies were taken away. The white men at the posts sometimes did not know of the bad things the soldiers did to us, but it was the white men who sent the soldiers to punish us for not bringing in enough rubber." The rubber tax was ordered to be paid by each village a certain amount per period of time. Over time, the demands increased, and over time, as the rubber vines close to the village were tapped out, people had to go further and further away to get the same amount of rubber. These Belgian agents hired soldiers, often in the form of the force publique, and the force publique went to villages and took hostages often. Here you have a force publique officer, and over here, they would take people hostage and say, go find the rubber, or else the hostages are tortured or injured or hurt. Often the hostages were women, children, and elderly people, the people that would most motivate the healthy young men to go search for rubber. The force publique were given bullets and guns to enforce the rubber tax, and they were conscripted from a nation other than the one that was being taxed. So, taking a page out of the British book, recruiting local soldiers, the Belgians recruited soldiers from country A to enforce the tax on country B, and then they recruited soldiers from country B to enforce the tax on country C, and then from country C to enforce the tax on country A. That way, the soldiers are not enforcing a tax on their own countrymen, but on the nation next door. The white Belgian agents did not have to do any of the violence themselves. They simply could pay the force publique to do it for them, and they would pay more money the more rubber was brought in. This led to starvation, this led to suffering, it led to people dying, falling out of trees to their death, getting eaten by wild animals, and many other horrors. The last question is, how did Leopold's management of the Congo lead to the death of 10 million people? The soldiers in the organizations like the Force Publique were given bullets to enforce the rubber tax. However, to prove that they hadn't wasted bullets on hunting, or even worse, prove that they had not been saving bullets for a mutiny, they were required to submit proof for each kill. The proof was shown in the form of the severed right hand of the victim. This unintentionally led to a market in severed hands. You have men like this, who were issued bullets to enforce the rubber tax, who would then have to submit severed hands to their agent in order to prove that they had used the bullets effectively. Unfortunately, sometimes bullets were wasted in hunting or used in non-approved manners. Sometimes the bullets shot missed, but you're still required to turn in a severed hand for each bullet issued. This sometimes led to the chopping off of the hand from a living person. You have innocent children like these here and here who had their hand chopped off by soldiers who needed to give like a receipt for the bullet that they had used. This led to an even more tragic situation where, in order to protect your village, an individual might raid another village and cut off the hands of the people there. And then when the soldiers arrived in your home, you could sell the hands to the soldiers as kind of a bribe to get them to leave your own town alone. It's sort of a way to protect your own people by attacking your neighbors. This picture here is pretty famous, and it's an individual who's contemplating the severed hands of the people of his neighboring village that are going to be submitted to soldiers to protect his own family, to protect his own people. Missionaries knew that this was going on. They took photos of the process. They had evidence. They recorded it. Everyone in the world kind of knew this was happening, but Leopold and his agents excused it by saying that there was a virulent form of hand cancer in the Congo, and that these people who were photographed missing their right hands had them amputated as a form of mercy to prevent the cancer from spreading. Missionaries also took photos of towns like this one up here. I think it's pronounced Turumu. Turumu village was photographed and was used in the US in some cases to show how primitive the people of the Congo were and how in need of Western assistance they were. The irony is that the destruction of their village and the fact that it's in such disrepair is directly related to the effect of European Belgian agents and the rubber trade. And so while the West was sending missionaries to supposedly uplift and save the people of Congo, the reason the people needed saving was the actions of those white people, those Westerners, those Christians themselves. All right. This set of slides is connected to the historical evidence question of how was genocide in the Congo Free State connected to industrialization and nationalism, or if you'd like to instead talk about racism in place of nationalism, that is also acceptable.